you are positively advantaged being black now, and this is just a fact. Whether you want to be black, applying to the best medical schools in the country, or to try to get a job at Netflix, or to get a job with the Ford Foundation.
I don't believe that, Sam, because the numbers just don't bear that out. If you look at
the numbers of admissions, the criteria
numbers of
for
admissions,
admission do bear
okay,
that out.
okay. But if you look at what the numbers of admissions, look at the Fortune 500 companies or the CEOs of the world.
I think everyone will acknowledge at this point that if you have black applicants if it's a toss-up with respect to their qualifications on paper, everyone's got the same scores, they went to, they got the same letters of recommendation, whatever it is, they are desperate to hire qualified black employees at every point along the way to run their conferences, to write for their magazines, to edit, et cetera, et cetera. It's hypocrisy.
Welcome back, everyone. So glad you could join us. I'm joined today by renowned philosopher, an author, a neuroscientist. His name is Sam Harris. Sam is a world-renowned academic. He's a neuroscientist. He's an author. He is the host of the podcast Making Sense and has made headlines for his work on concepts like free will, like artificial intelligence, spirituality. It is a pleasure to have you on, Sam. Thank you very much. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Nice to see you, Don.
It's good to see you as well. So let's get started on this. I want to start with what brought you to fame, right? Your rise to fame. Mm-hmm. It's your writings on the subject of atheism. You've been dubbed, because of that, I believe, by as one of the four horsemen of new atheism. You, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens. Since you first began publishing on this subject, how have your views shifted on the subject of atheism, sir?
Well, I can't say they've shifted much, apart from the growing conviction that started fairly early on that atheism as a concept is not one we really need, right? I was an unconventional atheist in that when I got inducted into the pantheon of public atheists after I wrote my first book, The End of Faith, I had never visited an atheist website or gone to an atheist conference or really read many atheist books. And the truth is, I never even used the term atheism in my first book, The End of Faith, which is what brought me onto the radar of so many atheists. Because I just think it's a concept we don't need. I mean, this is a point that I've made many times before, but it's just, to reject astrology, you don't have to become a non-astrologer, right? You just have to talk about things like reason and common sense and evidence and science, right? And if astrology ever became ascendant in our society, if you couldn't become president unless you took astrology seriously, we could criticize all that without forming a political movement around being a non-astrologer, right? So I just think there's some conceptual confusion in defining atheism as a political identity, although it's understandable that so many people have, because atheism is, it's certainly grown a lot in the last 20 years, but at the time I started writing, it was only a single-digit percentage of Americans who would describe themselves as atheists, and it was the only political identity that guaranteed you had no political future in America in particular.
But people like to, they like to put you in a box. They like to define you, right? So you don't consider yourself an atheist. Do you take issue to that, or is that an insult?
I'm not shy about saying I'm an atheist, but it just doesn't contain much information. I'm an atheist with respect to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because the only thing you need to do to be an atheist there is to reject the claim that any of those specific books were written or inspired or channeled in some other way by the creator of the universe. Yeah. Or that.
So then what would you call yourself then? How would you describe yourself? You said because you don't get much understanding about who you are just from that term. So who are you?
I'm doing my best to be a reasonable person whose convictions scale with good evidence and good arguments. And among my convictions are that spirituality, for lack of a better name, is an all too important project. I mean, we really there are the further reaches of the continuum of human well-being that I think we should all personally want to explore, and we should want to understand scientifically. But the thing I would point out is that whatever is possible for us spiritually, I mean, if self-transcending love is possible, if a true experience of selflessness is possible, right? As I think that both of those things are, we want to understand that in terms that are not sectarian, and dividing our community on the basis of Iron Age tribes, right? I mean, there's a deeper set of universal and transcultural truth claims to be made there about the capacity of the human mind.
Sam, 1 in 5 U.S. adults describe their religious affiliation as nothing in particular. I mean, and that religion doesn't appear to be that important to them. What is causing you think this drift from religiosity in Americans?
It's a hard question. The honest answer is I don't know. I think it probably has something to do with more access to information. Ultimately, I mean, I just think that there is an important asymmetry between in the tug of war, which is now many centuries old, between Enlightenment rationality and secularism and a universal conception of human rights and democracy and everything else that's on the good side of that sort of progress that allows for open societies, and religious orthodoxy, Iron Age certainties about the unique veracity of a single revelation, right? So it used to be that if you were a Christian, somewhere around the 14th century, the 15th century, it was expected that you could be killed for thought crimes, but by the religious orthodoxy that governed everything. Right now, we have fought a very difficult battle against that kind of theocracy in the West, and we have a lot to show for it. I mean, that's just that in a Christian context. Burning people alive for being gay or being a witch, as though witches existed, or being a blasphemer, etc. That just doesn't happen anymore. I mean, it's capable of happening in a few contexts in sub-Saharan Africa among Christians, but generally speaking, that problem is behind us. That we can't say that. Under Islam, right? I mean, Islam has not made the same kind of progress we have in modernizing, and that's because it simply hasn't had to. It's been sheltered from modernity for many centuries, so I view the growth of secularism in America as just a furthering of the process of just certain certainties become untenable, once you get battered by more facts and more argument and better evidence and a greater understanding of science, etc. I mean, evolution is, in America, evolution is a topic that has been quite, controversial in the last quarter century, but less and less so. I mean, you can't with a straight face, unless you're a moron like Tucker Carlson, deny the reality of evolution when someone's got a camera on you, and it's just. I mean, that's the. I don't. Again, this is a unidirectional phenomenon. It's not like we're seeing more and more. We're only seeing things that were once explained by religion get better and better explained by science and secular rationality, and that's it doesn't run the other direction. I can list 100 things about which religious authority was the only authority, and now we understand these things scientifically, and you don't have religious figures talking about those things anymore. I mean, something like
that makes believers really uncomfortable, right? And they think that somehow you're blasphemous, and they would even say, "Oh my gosh, this guy must be the devil," right? This must be the Antichrist, because that's how the devil. You understand what I'm saying? That's how the devil gets into people, is by making you believe, making you a non-believer and believing that God does not exist. There's always some method of control in that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all of these frames of religious discourse are hermetically sealed. I mean, the doors leading out of religious fundamentalism simply don't open from the inside, because everything can be rationalized as a further sign of God's mysteriousness, or as a test of your faith. I mean, even Mother Teresa, as we know, after she died, confessed to her confessor for years that she had essentially lost her faith, right? But so here we have this religious expert who is lionized the world over as a true exemplar of the fruition of Christianity, and yet she's saying that she just can't feel God's presence, and she's not sure He exists, et cetera, et cetera. And yet her confessor bends this all back on her as an example of her sharing in the passion and suffering of Christ, right? And so I mean, this is a system in which even when the doubts of the experts can be used as evidence in favor of the doctrine, right? Then you have a proper echo chamber.
I want to talk to you more. Actually, Sam, I'm writing a book on religion. It's called "I Once Was Lost: My Search for God in America," and I write in there that I part of the impetus for writing the book was I said to my friend once, who was visiting from Louisiana, where I'm from, and it's very religious, right? It's a deep South, the Bible Belt, and I said to him, when I was in a moment of non-belief, and I said, "If you want to believe in that fairy tale," and he said, "I have to." And it clicked this, something in me. And I said, you know what, I need to write about this, because there are moments when I have to as well, but it's because I want to, but not at the, not by hurting other people, right? So if someone is not a believer, then I offer them the ability and the possibility and the leeway to be a non-believer, but not everybody can do that. I'm a believer because I want to be a believer, not at the expense of the other person, is what I'm saying. Well, is that fair?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I don't think belief works that way. I don't think you can believe something to be true because you want it to be true, or because you think believing it to be true will be so useful in your life. I think, and we recognize that in every other context, but a religious one. So if I told you that I thought Jennifer Lawrence and I were someday going to get married, right? I've never met Jennifer Lawrence, right? Yeah, but I'm sure that we're going to get married. And you asked me why.
If you have faith, Sam, that could happen.
Yeah. I have you. I'm just chock full of faith, and among other things. And I want this to be so. This belief, Don, you don't understand. This belief gives my life meaning, right? And I wouldn't want to live in a universe where I'm not going to marry Jennifer Lawrence. I mean, these are the kinds of things people say in defense of their religious beliefs, and they make absolutely no sense when you map them onto any other propositional claim about the way the world is or the way the world will be in the future. A belief doesn't work that way. I mean, this is the very essence of wishful thinking and motivated reasoning, right? I mean, this is the thing we purge from our conversation in a scientific context, and that's the only way we can do science. That's the only way we can converge on, designing anything like a map that fits the territory, because we know we're not bullshitting ourselves.
Yeah. But you know what they say, Sam? They say faith without works is dead. So maybe if you actually made an effort, without becoming a stalker, of course, to reach out to Jennifer Lawrence, then perhaps you could.
My wife would be the first impediment to that project. So let's acknowledge that up front.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. So let's move on now, because I want to talk to you when you mentioned Islam, and I think it's good to put in the context of what's happening, if it's okay with you, with what's happening in Gaza and Israel. Okay. The conflict in Gaza, especially the role of religion there, Islam and Judaism, jihadism, I should say, excuse me, not Judaism, in a post 9/11 world is what I want to talk about, because Palestinians are more precisely, they're Hamas, and more precisely, I should say, and Hamas are influenced tremendously by Islam, I believe, while the Israeli state, to some degree, is a religious ethno-state. You can correct me if you don't, believe in the parameters that I'm putting on this. But what role do you think religion is playing in this conflict?
Well, I think it's playing an enormous one, especially on the Palestinian side. I mean, it's not that you can't find religious maniacs on the Israeli side. You certainly can, and their presence is quite unhelpful and doing its best to inflame the conflict, right? So I think the settlements in the West Bank, et cetera, all of that is a disaster, and insofar as Netanyahu has had to pander to the far right of his government in order to maintain a government, all of that's confusing and unhelpful, and makes it seem like there's some symmetry between the religious lunacy on the Israeli Jewish side and the lunacy that is endemic to the Palestinians. And there really is no parity there. I mean, it's just this is a completely asymmetric situation.
How so? You said lunacy. You described
Yeah.
that on the Palestinian side.
Yeah, I mean, so
how is there
the lunacy there
symmetry?
is around a cult of jihad and martyrdom, right? I mean, Hamas is explicitly a death cult. It describes itself that way. It aspires to death while fighting to create a global caliphate, right? It aspires to genocide against the Jews. I mean, they're absolutely explicit in these aims. They're not hiding their genocidal motives. They're organized explicitly around a hoped for genocide against the Jews. But of course the problem really isn't just the Jews in Israel. This is a larger conflict against the infidel West, or the infidel and apostate everywhere, really. I mean, within and without the Muslim community, right? This is both a war against non-Muslims and a civil war within Islam. And here I'm talking about not just Hamas, but jihadists everywhere. I'm talking about, obviously the Islamic State and Al Qaeda and Boko Haram and Al Shabaab. I mean, there's all these groups. They're different in a variety of ways. Some of them would consider others apostates because they're not sufficiently rigorous in their theology, but they're generally aligned on one thing, which is that if you are a believing Muslim, it is incumbent upon you to convert, subjugate, or kill the infidel, right? And this is non-negotiable. And I'm not saying that all Muslims everywhere are living this way, obviously, and that's a very good thing. But this radical core of the Muslim world, which we can call Islamist in the kind of the general political orientation, but jihadist in terms of those who are willing to sacrifice their lives now for the cause. This is an enormous problem in 100 countries, right? And Israel is just the canary in the coal mine, revealing just what an emergency this can become for any society.
You have been deeply critical of Islam, and we've had these conversations in the past, particularly radical Islam. You're very critical of them in your work. You described Islam as incompatible with modernity, I believe. You described a significant subsect of Muslims as medieval barbarians, I believe. Have your views shifted at all as this war has progressed?
Well, no, it's just my sense. I mean, first of all, there are a few caveats to add to the words you just put in my mouth. I mean, so again, when I'm talking about these things, I'm not talking about people as much as I'm talking about the power of ideas. Right now, obviously, people are to one degree or another are infected by these ideas. Right, so I'm worried about violence and the conditions we create for it. But this is ideas, right? This is not a matter of race or ethnicity or country of origin, right? I mean, this is nothing I'm saying impugns Arabs or people from Pakistan or Persians or per se, right? Everything I'm saying applies just as much to a white guy in Marin County who wakes up one day and decides to join Al Qaeda because he thinks that the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe, right? So, of which there have been examples, like someone like John Walker Lind, right, or Adam Gadon, who joined Al Qaeda. John Walker Lind joined the Taliban, right? So, again, these are ideas. I'm talking about ideas and their consequences, not race or nationality or any other piece of culture. And the problem with certain ideas is that they can make it seem entirely reasonable to celebrate your own coming death or even the deaths of your children in defense of completely spurious claims about the divine origin of a specific book, right? I mean, there are people like if we drew a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad on this podcast and showed it to everyone on YouTube, right, you and I would spend the rest of our lives in hiding, right? That's the world we're living in, right? There would be tens of thousands of people in the streets, in the capitals of major cities, protesting such a thing. There's only one religion on earth that aggressively seeks to impose its strictures on people who don't share the faith, right? And even if they didn't do that, even if it was just the strictures applied within the faith among 2 billion people, we have to recognize that we're living in a world now where there's real gender apartheid, right? I mean, we've worried about the apartheid in the past in South Africa. Some people, dishonestly claim that Israel is an apartheid state. It's absolutely not. But there isn't a problem of apartheid. It's gender apartheid throughout the world in sufficiently Orthodox Muslim communities where women are forced to wear a veil and they're deprived of all kinds of political and rights to education, etc. And there are degrees of this, obviously. But what we have in the West are a lot of Ivy League educated people who are totally confused about the significance of the hijab, right? And they imagine that it's a sign of female empowerment, just throwing off the male gaze. And you've got a religious bully and theocrat like Linda Sarsour being, anchoring the Women's March, right? And Shepard Fairey creates a poster of a beautiful woman in a hijab, right? This is all upside down. Most of the people who wear the veil throughout the Muslim world are forced to do it by the violence of the men in their lives, right? And the women in the West who call themselves feminists have abandoned them, right? And it's a fucking scandal. And if the left in the West doesn't get their head screwed on straight around variables like this, what we're going to witness are increasingly authoritarian people, governments, populist movements, which we're already seeing in Western Europe and in America, get energized around some very obvious bright lines, ethically and morally. And
when you look at what's happening, just in the context of the war, and I'm going to talk to you about the broader thing, but when you look at what's happening with the war and you see, so far, 13,000 children have died. People ask about the proportionality. Couldn't a similar thing be said about the Jewish state? And because you have been critical of the Jewish state as well, I think you said, and I quote, tell me if I'm misquoting, you said, I don't think Israel should exist as a Jewish state. I think it is obscene, irrational, and unjustifiable to have a state organized around a religion. So I don't celebrate the idea that there's a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. I certainly don't support any Jewish claims to real estate based on the Bible.
Well, actually, Don, that is a point on which my mind has changed since October 7th. I mean, I was somebody who felt that consequential anti-Semitism was more or less behind us, right? And like many Jews, my eyes have been opened since October 7th. That I was just asleep around this issue. I didn't understand the capacity. Not just. I mean, I understood it in the Muslim world, but I didn't understand the capacity in every Western country to get confused again about the problem of anti-Semitism and to be literally in the aftermath of the worst atrocities since the Holocaust against Jews, to be defending the murderers, right? And this is what the crucial point to focus on is not the chaos in Gaza once Israel began prosecuting its defensive war. That is, it's easy to see how people get confused about that. Collateral damage is awful. We can talk about that if you want to, but it is. I will be the first to admit that it's very difficult to make sense of imagery of dead children being pulled out of rubble. Right? I mean, there's no political argument that will make someone feel good about those images. But the thing you have to focus on are the hours and days that followed October 7th, when people everywhere at our most elite institutions, 32 student groups at Harvard University, just tripped over themselves in their rush to demonstrate that they were on the side of people who would tie families together and burn them alive, right? This is before Israel did anything in response, We had people celebrating the atrocities perpetrated by Hamas, and not just Hamas, just random Palestinians who came across the border to participate in them. It should be mind-blowing to everyone that so many people were capable of not seeing the difference between people who intentionally murder utterly peaceful people, children, at dawn in their beds, right? And people who would defend themselves against such people and in the process create the collateral damage that is now associated with every type of war, certainly any urban war.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to know why you think the mostly young people who are on college campuses, who are, a lot of them on college campuses, not all of them, and minorities feel like it is a genocide. Do they not know the lack of history? Is there something there that causes them to relate to it? Because and do you not feel like a Western state, like Israel, right? Like the state of Israel, that it's supposed to operate on ideals of a free and fair society, that it should hold itself to a higher standard?
Well, I think it does hold itself to a higher standard, and it's being held to the highest possible standard, and actually impossible ones, by the rest of the world. I mean, I think the reality of what Israel faces in Gaza is unprecedented. And we're talking about hundreds of miles of tunnels that took 15 years and billions of dollars in aid from the rest of the world to build. Aid that was literally stolen from the mouths of the Palestinians for whom it was intended. And we have a jihadist organization that is using its own civilians as human shields. Right? This is no one has faced this collection of problems, and I think I follow the reporting of John Spencer on this. Who runs the Modern Warfare Institute at West Point. Right. Who said that we haven't seen any armed forces navigate a problem this challenging, anything like this well. There's no reason to think America or the UK or France or any other democratic society would do a better job of trying to destroy a terrorist death cult that had just come across its border and murdered over 1,000 of its civilians. Right? I mean, if this happened in New York and Al-Qaeda was in New Jersey, America wouldn't do a better job of this. Certainly if Al-Qaeda had spent 15 years tunneling under Newark and holding everyone hostage as human shields.
Whatever people believe, whatever terrible things that people believe Israel has done, it's true to say that they've used more restraint in their fighting against Palestinians than we Americans, Western Europeans, have used in wars related to America and Western Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it seems unfair to compare it to World War II, right? Everyone says, well, like it's natural to say, well, look at the bombing of Dresden, right? Just how much humanitarian aid were we giving to Dresden as we were bombing it into rubble and killing non-combatants by the tens of thousands, right? In World War II, need to say nothing of what we did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? So, but I think many of us intuit that the ethics of war have changed, and we just couldn't fight that way now, and wouldn't fight that way now. And I mean, that's we can leave that for strategists and historians to wrangle over. But I mean, it's just it always just seems like a below the belt comparison to make. But it's true.
It's okay. But listen, one thing again. I want to get to the why young people are feeling that way, because I don't believe that I heard an answer from you. But I want to know what you think, because obviously you don't think that innocent kids and people in Gaza should be dying, do you? Are you saying it's the fault of?
But so I mean, this is the what I think has happened. This goes partway to answering the question you just asked about why young people are viewing this so differently. One thing that has happened is that because of social media, we have something like 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people, a lot of people discovering for the first time how horrible war is, right? In particular, urban war.
Right.
Now, you layer upon that reality the fact that Hamas is the worst possible enemy. It is using its own women and children as human shields, right? This is a completely perverse behavior that you almost never see anywhere. I mean, this is just there are no analogies that come to mind. I mean, there jihadist groups do this routinely, but virtually no one else does this. This is not, there's some version of this that happens in many guerrilla wars where guerrillas just kind of just disappear among the population. But this is much more calculated than that. This is literally the use of people as human shields. It's forcing them not to leave. I mean, our soldiers in other conflicts have encountered people, literally putting the butts of their rifles on the shoulders of children and shooting from behind them, right? I mean, this is not behavior that we would ever participate in. If you imagine the IDF doing this, right? Imagine the Jews of Israel, in order to defend themselves against Hamas, using their own women and children as human shields. I mean, this would be a grotesque Monty Python sketch. All the Jews would die because, of course, Hamas doesn't care about killing women and children. That's
I understand what you're saying, Sam, but I'm just trying to figure out the sense of proportionality in this, right? I think you've explained to me, you believe young people don't know the history. Is that what you're saying? You believe that they are being influenced by social media and that they have not studied or don't know, they don't have enough wisdom, correct?
Well, it's everything. They're being lied to by propagandists. I mean, they're being told things about Israel that are not true. They're being shown images that they can't possibly understand. And they're being shown images that no one can, as I said, can emotionally understand, because if you see images of dead babies, that's just is pure evil. Right.
So then what do they do then? What's the solution? Because I ask this when I speak to rabbis, I speak to people all the time. And what I say to them is that you can't tell these young people that they don't know. That's like telling a Trump supporter or a MAGA person that they're dumb. They're just going to dig in, right? That you're stupid to follow this person. Shouldn't you try to draw these young people in to try to help them gain some understanding and a sense of history instead of telling them how stupid they are?
Well, it's not a matter of, I mean, they're clearly not stupid. We're talking about,
or how ignorant they are of what's happening.
Our finest institutions. I mean, literally, if you select for the best colleges in America with the highest standards, you get the most confused, the most morally confused people on this issue right now.
And that's my point. These kids are on college campuses where they're learning at the highest institutions, critical thinking, right? And how to push against the boundaries of the Constitution, the First Amendment in particular here.
But they're not learning critical thinking, and they're not really learning to think about these hard problems with anything like ethical dispassion or wisdom, right? I mean, the thing that we haven't talked about here, which is doing tremendous work, and I think all of it harmful, is the oppressor-oppressed narrative that is for the most part being exported from an American civil rights context, right? The mapping the struggle of African Americans in America onto the problems of the rest of the world, as though that was the right lens through which to see everything, right? So in this framing, the Jews of Israel are considered, white people, which makes zero sense given who's actually living in Israel. And the only black people you're going to find in Israel are Ethiopian Jews fighting for the IDF, right? So it's just like, this is completely crazy. But let's leave that aside. The Jews of Israel are white oppressors of the black and brown Palestinians. And that's just on its face a confession of pure evil, right? That's all you need to know, right? So we're on the side of the Palestinians because they're the black guys being oppressed as though it's 1964 in Alabama, and we know whose side we're on, right? And that's the analysis, and then you heap upon that just torrents of misinformation, just lies and half truths about everything, and so people are
interesting. So then you still haven't told me what's the solution. Maybe we don't know.
Intentions of groups.
Sorry, you're cut out. Sorry, I thought you were
well, the solution is to. Sorry. I mean, the solution is to keep making these clear distinctions, right? And to point out that again, this is a much larger problem than the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. I think we have a much larger problem in a conflict between jihadism and Islamism and open societies everywhere. So that we have to dissect all of that, and we have a problem domestically and in the West in a certain activist class just distorting our conversation about politics. I mean, this you would think
that's on purpose. That's on purpose to do that. But just so because I want to move on, the sense of proportionality,
Sure.
right? When you look at all the people who have been killed, at least what I think it was 1,139 Israelis have been killed and 13,000 children in Gaza. I think 35,000 for Gaza.
But Don, this term proportionality means something else in the context of a war and the international laws that govern war and the philosophy of just war. Proportionality doesn't mean you kill the same number of people that your attackers killed on your side. That's
not how war works, anyways. But go on. Yeah.
I mean, it has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with whether or not a certain military action is strategically advantageous enough to warrant collateral damage, right? So if you're going to kill 1 million people to kill one combatant, well, that sounds morally insane and not proportional. But it offers no suggestion that the numbers of dead should be the same on the two sides of this conflict. Israel has an existential burden in fighting Hamas, right? This is far worse than 9/11 for America, right? I mean, it's worse proportionally when you just look at the demographics. If you per capita, it's like Al Qaeda killed 40,000 innocent people in Manhattan on that day and abducted 8,000 hostages. I mean, that's the proportional situation. But what happened to Israel, in fact, far worse than that, because even if you scaled up 9/11 for America, it would never have been an existential threat to 300 million Americans. Hamas really is an existential threat to Israel, and certainly when you add Hezbollah and Iran to the picture, Israel is fighting for its life, and in doing that, they have, by the laws of war, wide latitude in how they try to fight a death cult that is again explicitly committed to genocide, not to nation building, to genocide.
It seems surprising to me. Maybe I just don't know, or haven't. I don't know enough about you. But I'm surprised that you have come to this conclusion, not on any judgment, but just how you feel about religion in general, right?
Nothing.
And that's why one of the first questions was like, is there anything that has forced you to change your feeling about what was happening in Israel and Gaza?
Well, so the religious variable for me is just in how I diagnose the politics and confusion on the Islamist and jihadist side. I'm not defending the religious claims of Jews anywhere.
No, I don't think anyone is thinking that. I'm just saying, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you reached this epiphany. You've had this sort of change of heart, which I think is that's an intelligent person who can actually do that.
Well, it's just my recognition of just where we are with respect to potentially genocidal anti-Semitism throughout the world, right? I think the picture is worse than I realize, and therefore, if there's going to be,
I was just going to say, you didn't understand the problem. You think you were ignorant about the big anti-Semitism, the amount of anti-Semitism was in the world.
I thought we had made the problem was in the rearview mirror to a degree that it's obviously not. But I mean, I would say that if this had happened to Denmark, right? If some jihadist group had come across the border in Denmark and murdered 1,200 people, everything I'm saying about Israel, I'd be saying about in defense of the Danes. The Danes have to kill these people, right?
I understand what you're saying. Do you think there's any similarity in what's happening in America, especially when you look at the last maybe 10, 12 years, 15 years in politics, with the rise of Barack Obama and then the religious right and these sort of radical right-wing groups, racist groups? Because I would have thought, and I'm a person of color, that we had made bigger gain or bigger strides when it comes to
Yeah.
racism in this country. Now I feel like we're moving backwards, especially if you look at what's happening in politics right now with the MAGA movement and, not teaching Black history in school and so on.
Well, I share your concern about the far right, and I do actually think that I underestimated the danger there previously as well, right? So it's definitely more on my radar in the last few years than it's ever been. But I do think that the far left, is in large part culpable for energizing the far right. I'm not saying that there weren't racists before we had people like Ibram X. Kendi going around telling us that everyone was racist, but he's made matters far worse. And the promotion of that kind of narrative by at the highest points of culture, right? In media, in Hollywood, in nonprofit institutions. I mean, there's been a complete capture of elite culture by a very woke understanding of just how excruciating racism still is in America. And that, I think, has largely amounted to a gaslighting of much of our society. And it has, if we get Trump again for 4 more years, I'm largely going to blame the far left of the Democratic Party for that. I just think it's, everything from drag queen story hour to, just the endless, arithmetic around pronouns to, the Jussie Smollett and the summer of 2020 and just mostly peaceful protests on your own former network, all that stuff so gaslit people and enraged people right of center that we still have in large part. I think that's why.
Well, it sounds like you're saying it's caused people to be racist. I don't know if I buy that, Sam.
Well, no,
I understand what you're saying.
It hasn't caused people to be racist. It's caused people to become very cynical and to lose their patience for obviously spurious claims of racism. And it's
well,
not
obviously,
just racism.
I mean, look, everyone knew Jussie Smollett. Even Jussie Smollett knew that he was, that was a lie. I think people understood that. I think that also you should watch you should watch the episode that we have up now with this transgender woman who feels as much the same way as you do about pronouns and about, drag queen story hour and so on. But I don't know if I would say that those people, because I believe the intentions are good and maybe they have backfired, they've gone too far, but I do believe that their intentions are good. I cannot for the life of me believe that they made things, extreme. I forget what the words you're saying. Considerably, I think you said, worse for people who may have racist tendencies. I don't know if I can buy that argument.
Well, it's not because it's not that these people have landed in unabashed racism, right? I mean, take something like so. I think you and I both have a former friend. Maybe you're still friends with him. He's a former friend of mine, Dave Rubin, right? I mean, look at his journey politically over recent years. It's not that he's become a racist, right? I think he's now, I think, squarely right of center. I don't think he would deny that.
I don't know but I think there people have other motivations. I think there are other motivations. People can become grifters because they see it's the shortest line to the front.
Yeah.
And I think that does happen with some people, the person we're mentioning or others, where they see, it's easy for me to gain popularity, money, and move to the front of the line. I saw that with a lot of people who were never Trumpers, and then they realized that by becoming pro-Trumpers that they could get on television, they could get television contracts, they can, get jobs in the White House and in government. But people have other motivations than just purely because I understand all of it, but that doesn't make me change my core and my understanding of what's going on. Certain people may go too far in their thinking and their actions, but their intentions are good. And you have the possibility of reeling them back in. Others, when you consider the far right racist, their intention is to be racist. The other person's intention is to try to stop someone from going too far, to stop racism from someone doing something that is harmful to society. And the other one is to, it is not that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think you're being you're too charitable to many figures on the far left, right?
But I have similar feelings about the way that you feel. But I understand when people's intentions are good. I understand when you are part of an underserved community. If you are a member of the transgender community and you are being targeted and or possibly your life is in jeopardy, you see your friends dying, I can understand why you're saying, I am a woman or whatever. I can understand that you want to be treated equally, and it may go too far. You're not trying to discriminate against someone else because you are trying to be safe and you want to be a viable part of society. That's something completely different.
Yeah, granted. I mean, and this is true, I would say, right of center too, unless you get too far right where you encounter genuine evil. But for most people, most of the time, people are trying, at least in their own minds, to do good things. Right, there are very few people who are consciously doing evil, right? And so largely this is a story of incentives.
I don't know about that with some of the. I don't know about that when someone is a member of the Klan, if someone is a member of the Proud Boys, if someone is a member of those groups who are out there saying Jews will not replace us. I don't think they're trying to do good all the time.
That's why I said if you go far enough right, you definitely meet some evil people.
Yeah.
But
I may have some similar thoughts about this as you, or maybe even David, which I haven't thought about in a long time. But look, quite frankly, I think Dave has been grifting. But that's just my personal opinion. Whatever. I understand that, but I also understand what it's like to be a person in the society who is discriminated against and someone who has been attacked. I understand that sometimes people can go too far in trying to get other people to understand, members of the larger culture or society, to understand the discrimination. And then you don't realize, as you have admitted with the war in Gaza, you don't realize how bad it is until you see people marching out on the street and until you see Heather Heyer dying. It's just not a problem for you. And one can be cynical about it and say, oh, well, they've gone too far with the pronouns. Yeah, I think people have gone too far with the pronouns. I just had that conversation with a transgender friend, and we both get attacked for it all the time.
Yeah.
But our intentions, their intentions are different than people who are being actively racist and people who are actively grifting and people who are actively trying to co-opt people to pay for their legal bills, people who want to enact Project 2025, who don't believe in a democracy, who is saying that if they get elected again, they're going to be a dictator. That's different.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are gradations to confusion and bad intent, across this landscape, and I mean, we can just sort of pick our places and share intuitions about what's really going on there. I think the general problem, though, is that we have to get out of this identity politics game, and it's the left that is enshrining that more and more in our politics. I mean, it's the left that is non-negotiable about the primacy of identity, and what it's doing is it's motivating white identity politics on the right, which is awful. Right? I mean, it's like
because I was going to say there's no bigger identity politics than MAGA.
Yeah,
that's the biggest identity politics in the country.
It's I think it's indefensible, but it's psychologically understandable, and it's to say it's shattering our society, right? I mean, now when you add the wait
a minute, you said it's psychologically understandable to see like MAGA folks become identity
if you spend enough time calling people racist, and race is only one variable here. Obviously, there's gender, there's Me Too, there's other stuff, right? But if you keep calling people racist and denying that we've made any progress, where we have made obvious progress on race, we had a two-term black president, but you tell them, oh, that's just a token. We had a two-term token black president, and racism is just as awful in American society as it's ever been, right? And to talk about grifters. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi is the greatest grifter I've ever seen in the ivory tower. You tell people that you're basically white privilege is this original sin that is indelible, that cannot be expiated by anything. You just have to apologize for it until the end of the world, right?
I don't think that's what people are saying. I think they're saying, look, and I'm not one of those. I think they're saying you should want that you should be aware of it. And I think they're saying you should be aware of it and you should be aware of the racism, because if you're not, then you lend yourself to having this epiphany, i.e. Sam Harris, that you did not understand the degree of anti-Semitism in the world. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, but I mean, we just have to be honest about the state of racism and its consequences in America, right? So, I mean, I think it is true to say
We're both saying the same thing. We have to be honest about the state of racism in America, and I think that by acknowledging the history of racism in this country and the influence that it still has over this country, I don't think that that's grifting. I would think. Now, I think that maybe Ibram X. Kendi, he's gone too far. Let me finish my thought, and I swear I'll let you finish. I think maybe that he has gone too far. Okay, that's fine if you can think that. But I would think that he would be a grifter if all of a sudden he started to change his core beliefs about it and then became something else. That's the folks that I see who were, sort of center left and center right, all of a sudden changing their core ideas and core beliefs within themselves so that they can gain something, usually materially, by joining the other side, is what I call a grift. The other thing is, I don't see that as equal to what Ibram X. Kendi is doing. Maybe what Ibram is doing has become a religion for him, and maybe he needs to examine that, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a grift. For me.
It's just dishonest. I mean, I do think certain people are grifters. I can be more charitable to people like Dave Rubin than that. I mean, it's not that I don't think he's got some of the grift about him, but I just know what it was like for him to be love bombed by everybody right of center and demonized by everybody left of center. I mean, if you run that psychological experiment on a person long enough, they begin to think, wait a minute, these people over here are a hell of a lot nicer and seemingly more sane and more honest than the people over here who are attacking me for things I didn't say or didn't mean to say, or they know that wasn't the point, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I look at the attacks that come my way from the right and the left, they have a different character, and there's much more gaslighting and insanity, in generally speaking, coming from the left. But what I would say about what's so wrong about Ibram X. Kendi and everyone, the activist class diagnosis of race in America now, is that we have made so much progress, especially with respect to elite culture, that what we really have under DEI is a regime of reverse racism, and even that phrase is treated like plutonium left of center.
Well, I don't believe in reverse racism. Racism is racism, whether it's against a black person, because reverse racism would be no racism.
Yeah, so there's anti-white and anti-Asian racism.
You said anti-white racism, yes, but and when people say reverse racism, I said, what does that mean? Is that equality?
Fine. I'll take that correction. So there's been obvious anti-white and anti-Asian racism practiced in our most elite institutions for many years now, and we've seen the consequences in the Ivy League and other great colleges, but it is everywhere. It's in Hollywood. It's in charities. It's in media.
Do you think you think that's anti-racism, or do you think that is the world or America correcting itself, and therefore equality by some can be deemed as unfair, as discrimination, when there's sort of a natural correction of what has happened in the past in America?
I mean, it's part of the legacy of what we've called affirmative action, and the justification for which was all too obvious 50 years ago. I mean, it's totally understandable how we got here, but what's happened? I mean, if you look at the case of like Harvard University, where in that recent lawsuit, it was revealed that for an Asian to get into Harvard with the same probability of a black applicant, he or she would have to have scored 400 points higher on the SAT, right? And you've got Harvard admissions officers using bizarre euphemisms like Asians lack personality in their rejection letters to, in their judgments of rejection for highly qualified Asian candidates, right? That's just racism. It's unfair. It's totally understandable. The Asians are pissed off. There's a similar story about what's happened to white applicants, but it was all in preference for black applicants because, on your account, which I totally agree with, I understand. There was this seeming moral imperative to correct for historical wrongs and present inequalities this way. I just think it's obviously the wrong way to correct for these inequalities. I mean,
how would you have, what's the right correction, you think? Because when we're talking about numbers, when it's kind of similar to what you were saying about war, like how many people, how many African Americans do you have to allow in who you believe, I'm not saying that is actually what's happening, aren't
right.
as qualified as an Asian or a white applicant. Again, I'm not saying that that's happening. And how long, when you consider you have hundreds of years of slavery and then decades of Jim Crow on top of that, then what is the right metrics? What is the right number of years to correct and to make up for centuries of mistreatment and discrimination and lack of wealth building, lack of education, not being allowed to vote, and so on? Like, what is how do you figure that out? And no reparations, because some people believe that there should be some form of reparations, and perhaps that is a form of reparations.
Right. Okay, well, first let me acknowledge it's an excruciating problem and very difficult to solve, and to my knowledge, no one knows how to solve it, right? So if I could solve it for you here, I would win the Nobel Prize and I would deserve it.
We would both, because I would lead you to solving it, but go on.
But I'll give you my, fairly considered opinion on this, which is, one, we should acknowledge that the history is every bit as awful as many people allege, right? I mean, so there's a lot to apologize for. There's a lot to be embarrassed about, and the question is, and there is present inequality that is almost certainly in part the consequence of that history, right? So just to take one example, which I think is still valid. This was true about a year ago, that the average wealth of a white family in America is 8 times the average wealth of a black family, right? So that's important, and that a lot follows from that. There are educational disparities that follow from that. There are health outcomes that are different. So that's we shouldn't be comfortable with that, right? Now the question is, what can be done about that, and what if any contribution of present racism in America is there to be found and to be expunged, right? And this is where the intuitions of right and left are going to divide radically, and it's important to understand who's being honest here, right? So when you look at the disparities in wealth inequality or disparities in violent crime, being the victim of violent crime, being the perpetrator of violent crime in America, the disparities are shocking. They're untenable. We should figure out what to do about them. But the question is, if we could wave a magic wand today and rid the country of every racist, right? We just had, there was literally not a person left who had a racist bone in their body. What would change in Black America? What opportunities would change? What behavior would change? What would the crime go down in Chicago, right? And I think there is very good reason to worry that not much would change, right? And
I don't know if I believe that. I think things would change, but I'll let you finish.
Okay, so this is an empirical question that we can't answer in this conversation, but intuitions divide radically on that point. I don't think some dozen people are going to be murdered in Chicago, by black on black violence in the cohort of 18 to 24-year-olds this weekend. Reliably, I can predict that. If I could go into a casino and bet on that, I'd make money every week of the year. Right? It's awful. I don't think it's because there's so many people in the Ku Klux Klan or so many people in Trumpistan or in QAnon who are really racist that is delivering us that outcome. Right? That is a problem we have to figure out how to solve. But I think racism is pretty far from the causal nexus for that problem.
I think it would change because then people would change their thinking. I think that would require, in order for, if you just, let's just say there was a magic bomb that, you could somehow, or magic bullet, you could somehow
Magic wand. I'm a
yeah,
man of
magic
peace,
wand.
Don.
Let's do that. Okay, I agree with you on that. A magic wand where you could rid the country of every single racist, then that would mean an entire attitude change for the country, right? And I think that would affect a lot of things. That would affect the trajectory of the lives of African Americans, because then there would be the racism moving forward in the society would change, which means
Except, again,
it would somehow affect the history, and it would affect people's the way we operate as a country, and we would realize that what racism has done to the country to put people into those places. People like to mention Chicago all the time. How did people end up in those housing units, the projects in Chicago, or in New York, for a matter of fact, or in California? How did people were not able to live in certain neighborhoods that eventually became ghettos because resources were taken away? So I think that would change things, and I do think that fewer people would end up dying or being shot, in certain neighborhoods, and if you want to call it the ghetto or whatever it is. So I think that would change. I would love for that to happen, as a matter of fact.
Well, I wouldn't say that it would be there'd be no change. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad thing if we were completely cured of racism, psychologically.
And ask a woman, like, what if you could get rid of all the misogynists and all the the Harvey Weinsteins of the world? You can say that. Well, nothing would change. A lot of things.
No. But that's a different example, and I think a lot would change there. But the other piece of this is, again, all the causes of racism that you've alleged are clearly in the past. I mean, we're not going to debate what 1950s America was like, and the consequences of redlining, et cetera. All right, so we see the legacy of our past racism, but the question is, what is enforcing inequality today? And what we have actually is, to come back to the overcorrection. To the contrary, we have in the most desirable parts of culture a flipping of the dial where you're positively advantaged if you're a person of color, and I would say especially if you're black, assuming you have anything like the same qualifications for the job. And if you can ask yourself whether you want to be black, applying to the best medical schools in the country, or to try to get a job at Netflix, or to get a job with the Ford Foundation.
I don't believe that, Sam, because the numbers just don't bear that out. If you look at
the numbers of admissions, the criteria
numbers of
for
admissions,
admissions,
okay. But if you look at what the numbers of admissions, look at the Fortune 500 companies, or the CEOs of the world, or as a matter of fact, the doctors of the world, or as a matter of fact, the pilots of the world. How many of them are people of color? I think that being admitted to college is something different than actually becoming a head of an organization or a part of an organization once there is no admission process. When the biggest admission process is, whether you knew someone, whether you're a legacy, whether or not your dad worked for the company, whether or not, again, you went to the right school. And so if you went to the right school, if all of these people were being let in and you had an advantage of being an African American, then we would see far more CEOs of companies be African Americans than white. We would see far more people being black pilots than white. We'd see far more black doctors than white. We'd see far more captains of industry than white. But we're not seeing that.
Not quite.
And we're not even seeing it in percentage-wise, Sam. It's just not working that way.
I can clarify this for you, because first of all, if you're talking about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, that's a longer process, right? I'm talking about the hiring practices of all these companies, and I'm talking about the likelihood of getting the post you're seeking, right? So here's a claim that I think anyone in a position of authority in any major organization, certainly a high status one, anywhere in our society, will be able to authenticate for themselves. If you're looking for applicants for jobs, right, or admissions to medical schools or law schools, et cetera, or if you're in Hollywood, you're looking to staff a writer's room on your next sitcom, or you're looking for a cinematographer to shoot a great movie, right? Whatever it is, right? Again, these are high status jobs. I'm talking about looking for someone to bus tables in a restaurant. I'm talking about where people really want to get to, which and the parts of the landscape where things are radically unequal, right? Where there's just kind of windfall profits if you can clear these bars, right? I think everyone will acknowledge at this point that if you have black applicants of the if it's a toss up with respect to their qualifications on paper, everyone's got the same scores, they went to, they got the same letters of recommendation, whatever it is, but you have one who's black and one who's white, right? You are positively advantaged being black now, and this is just a fact, right? And it's been a fact for quite some time, and everyone knows this, right? So this is the gaslighting to say that this isn't happening. For Ibram X. Kendi, who got $10 million from Jack Dorsey to open a bogus lab at Boston University, right? For him to be saying that we're suffering under this crushing burden of racism against black people throughout our highest institutions, and to go to the Aspen Ideas Festival and just serve this pablum to a largely white audience that just drinks it up because they love to be called racist, when they know they are desperate to hire qualified black employees at every point along the way to run their conferences, to write for their magazines, to edit, et cetera, et cetera. It's hypocrisy. And it's truly infuriating to everyone right of center because they know it's hypocrisy. They know it's a lie.
Well, I don't know that. Let me say, if you can present that if you presented facts to me, then fine. I don't know that it's a lie. I don't know that it's a lie.
John, these are facts.
Let me finish,
okay.
and then I'll let you.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it is a lie. And I would imagine there has to be some truth to what you're saying is fine. But what I said, I still believe, where is the line? What are the metrics? Now, Ibram X. Kendi and what is it? What's his dad? Dave Rubin, right? You mentioned. I haven't thought about Dave Rubin in so long.
Yeah, I brought him up because I knew you knew him.
Yeah, it's been a while. But when Ibram X. Kendi, listen, I don't know enough about what he's doing, but examples of sort of elite people who happen to be African American or happen to be members of the LGBTQ community, the few people who have made it and perhaps are trying to speak for the millions of other people who have not, or who are not in that position, it doesn't mean that what they're fighting for does not exist because they happen to be one of few or the only persons in those spaces to be able to bring light to a situation that others may not be aware of.
Well, I'm not denying. Again,
it's not like there are 100 Ibram X. Kendis or 1,000. There's one of him, and it's okay for one Jewish person who happens to be, in the spaces to be able to create change, to speak for Jewish people. One African American who happens to be in a space where they may be the one or the only one to speak for the masses. That's okay. For a woman who happens to become a CEO
it's not that there's one
most of the CEOs in the country are men, for her to be able to speak about other women, to say that, okay, she has achieved this, and for her to stand there and say, it's just ridiculous for her as a woman to have achieved what she's achieved, and to say that there's discrimination makes no sense when all these other women behind her know that they're being discriminated against, but they may love that she's the woman in that space to be able to defend them and to be able to tell their story.
Well, I think there are many claims about discrimination against women at this point in our society that are also fallacious, right? They're just not. It's a kind of moral hallucination, right? And there are other factors when you're going to talk about why women wind up in certain offices and not others, right? I mean, this is something I can speak to in the scientific community. It's often alleged that women are discriminated against in science. Historically, I'm sure that was true. Currently, it's much more a story of just different interests and steering them in different directions. So when you look at why are there so few women computer scientists or engineers, it's far lower than 50%, which is what you'd expect if it was just kind of randomly assigned. it's not, people have alleged that it's because of the misogyny of those fields, but it's much more a story of women being less interested in those domains, and they're much more interested in biology and psychology, where they're overrepresented. I mean, there's more than 50% of graduating biologists and psychologists and
Is there something in the
sociologists
culture that has
women.
historically pushed them that way, and maybe they just are not aware? I don't know. I can't
No,
speak to that.
I think it could be cultural, it could be biological, it could be a mix of both, but I don't think it ultimately matters. I mean, the truth is, the end game is, I think we have to fight for, and I think this is implied in Martin Luther King's work, and certainly in his hope that we ultimately judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, is that we have to get out of the business of caring about the superficial differences between people. I mean, literally no one knows and will ever know and will ever think to ask how many blonde people got into Harvard last year, right? No one cares.
Yeah,
No one would ever
but
think
I'm
to care.
I'm in a business where people care about blonde. Well, I was when in corporate media. It was
No, but I mean, as far as discrimination against blonde people, no one is worried about it because we don't have a history of it. And,
But it's a social. You're saying these things are social constructs, right?
I'm just saying it doesn't. I'm saying we need to ultimately just be people judged on our individual merits, right? And to be part of a group.
That is a point of
toxic.
agreement for both of us. I agree 100%. Let's agree with that, and let's table this for a minute. Let's continue to talk about this, because I think it's really important for you and I to be able to discuss this. And I think it's people who have different worldviews. It's important, and there's no animus. Just so folks know that, I actually like speaking with you. So how does this conversation that you and I have just had? How do you think this plays out in the election? We mentioned Trump a little bit. We mentioned MAGA. How do you think? What influence do you think this will have in November of 24?
Well, I worry that Trump will get reelected. I think that if Biden and Harris don't have some kind of sister soldier moment with respect to the far left of the party, I don't know if that would be around the issues we're just talking about around identity politics and wokeness, or if it's around Israel or immigration or whatever it is. But if they can't demonstrate that there's real daylight between them and the far left, I just see it continuing to go in the wrong direction for them. Just in terms of the polling and the likelihood.
We have a similar feeling on this, because I think that Democrats are bad politicians just in general. They're not as good as Republicans in sort of in messaging. I should say, not bad politicians. They're bad at messaging. They're not good at having people rally around, getting people to rally around them. I do think that they have to figure out what to do with the far left part of the party who don't understand who their allies are, right? When they are, when people are shouting down, when members of Black Lives Matter are shouting down Hillary Clinton back in 2016, it was like, why are you doing that? It makes no sense. But I think the same thing, can't the same thing be said about the right? Because I actually think in this time, the time that we're in now, considering what you're saying and how people feel about woke and all of that, I think that this is the Republican Party has an opportunity, and they're not going to be able to take advantage or capitalize on that opportunity if they continue to have the far right MAGA extremists in their party, and they don't deal with that part of the racist and bigoted element of the party. But I don't know how that's going to play come November. That could be energizing for the Republicans. So maybe your argument is right. That could be energizing for the MAGA folks, and it could hinder the turnout for the Democrats.
I just don't think the Republican Party is a normal political party at the moment.
Wow.
It's a personality cult. It's not functioning the way it used to, and we can't expect anything reasonable from it at the moment. I mean, it's just that they're totally in thrall to Trump's base, and Trump's base is not a normal political movement. I mean, I guess it's all too normal when you look at the sweep of history. I mean, it's this populist, quasi-religious cultic phenomenon that has a proper demagogue at the top of it, right? So I mean, happily, he's not as bad as he could be. I mean, I think Trump is, we shouldn't exaggerate how scary he is. He has no ideas, right? He's not ideological. He's got no big vision of what he wants to accomplish. He's just a morbidly selfish, you know,
Yeah.
cartoonish.
Speaking of grift.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, he's the ultimate con man. I mean,
Yeah,
he's a game show host who lies about everything, who became president and may yet become president again.
Yeah, I really like talking about this because I think there's something to be learned from both of us, right? From having these conversations. And I understand, I want to know where this sort of, thing about the left, like the idea that people have about it. And I certainly understand it in a way, but I want to understand it more because I feel like the folks who have been sort of made into characters like the AOCs of the world or whatever, I think that they don't have the influence, as much influence over the Democrats as the far right has over, the MAGA folks have over the Republican Party. It's not to say that, it's not concerning, but I don't think that they have as much influence.
Well, they have tremendous influence over elite culture. They have a tremendous influence over the New York Times and Harvard and Netflix, etc. Right? This is where if you've got, blue hair and a septum piercing, and you're worried about what pronouns to call your cats, you've got a lot of leverage, and it's what everyone right of center is reacting to. Now, I'll grant you that the far right is quite a bit scarier in terms of its aims, and there's just it does have a purchase on power insofar as Trump and Trumpism is moving in that orbit, right? So I worry about our democracy. I worry about, again, not so much that Trump himself is ideological, but he's pure chaos, and what he has revealed about our society is that something like 30, 40, maybe even 50% of Americans don't care that we had a sitting president who would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, or who has been, found guilty of 34 criminal counts of, it doesn't matter to them, right? Of falsifying.
Well, although that aside, in their defense, I just think that was terribly played by the Democrats. I think that is,
that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, but the fact that they don't care about what got us here. So look, we can argue about whether it was a case that should be brought and the legal whatever. I agree, and yes, the pronoun thing for me, even as a member of the LGBTQ community, I understand you on that. Trust me, I do. Trust me, I do. We need to worry about the bigger things rather than what someone calls us. I don't care what you call me. I don't really care what you call me. I'd rather have someone in office who believes what I believe, and at the end of the day, will fight for my right as an American, and rather than what pronoun someone calls me. That's just how I feel. So, well, listen. After all of this thinking, everything that we have talked about, none of it may matter, Mr. Harris, if we're talking about AI, because then, people will say. The AI-generated version of Don Lemon or Sam Harris will just say whatever people want to hear from that, and so it may not even matter in the future. That means our democracy is over. AI controls everything. Am I crazy?
Yeah, except this is another point in favor of the right-wing reaction to the woke, because as we know, many of our most powerful AI models have been designed to be woke, and there have been some fairly embarrassing things. In fact, I think it's still true that if you go to ChatGPT now, the latest model, and you say, tell me a joke about Jesus, it'll tell you a joke about Jesus. If you say, tell me a joke about Buddha, it'll tell you a joke about Buddha. If you say, tell me a joke about Muhammad, it'll say, sorry, that would be disrespectful. I wouldn't want to disrespect a religious figure. Can't do that.
Yeah. But that's not woke. I mean, that has to do with...
Sure it is. Yeah.
That has to do with, that's religion, right? I don't know.
Well, it's only the left wing in our society that wants to bend the knee to these religious sensitivities that are unequally apportioned across the religious landscape.
I don't know what the left has to do with Islam and.
So it has a ton to do. I mean, let me connect those dots. It has a ton to do with it because, again, on the left, Muslims are perceived as a beleaguered victim group in our society, a disproportionately brown-skinned group of people that really require our care and concern because there's so much Islamophobia directed at them, and there are kind of stealth Islamist organizations in America that pretend to be the Muslim version of the ACLU that weaponize this framing, right? That this is just we have this catastrophic problem of Islamophobia, and everything I've said on this in this conversation so far is a symptom of my own Islamophobia, and it's just pure bigotry. It's racism, and like people will conflate any criticism of the doctrine of Islam with racism as though that made any sense at all, as though Muslims in 100 countries belong to a single race. I mean, it's just, again, it's the oppressor oppressed narrative.
Okay, I can't deny your experience because I've been criticized from everyone from the left to the right, blacks to gays to everybody, trans people. I've gotten it from everyone, so I can't deny your experience. But
get it from the Muslims next.
Well, I got it from the Muslims. I don't know if you remember when you were on my program. I really got it from the Muslims. But I'm not denying your experience. But I look at that as sort of a world governmental problem and not as a problem of the left, because I never hear, I don't hear people on the left, and especially don't hear people of the color sympathizing with jihadists and whatever. But
well, they are. Everyone who's sympathizing with Hamas as a legitimate uprising against Israeli oppression is failing to understand the absolute evil of this organization and the movement behind it.
Yeah, but I think of that mostly as the people who are out on the streets. I think that's mostly young people who are, as you say, being affected by whatever circumstances you think they're being affected by. Certainly none of the people of color in my life are not feeling that way. Certainly even the Democrats or the lefties in my life don't feel that way. So, I'm not sure what the exact polling numbers would show about that, but I would think it's more of a generation gap, Sam, than anything, because I speak to young Jewish people and they feel the same way. They feel the same way as young Muslim or Arabs, and they all sort of are in the same playbook, which is a bit surprising to me. So,
go for it.
To be continued, I'll let you have the last point. Go on.
Well, no, I would just say that politically it reaches deeper than that. I mean, the generational gap you're pointing to is certainly true, but if you just look at who in American society is framing all of this and has been doing this for decades through this lens of Western oppression of non-Western peoples and Orientalism and imperialism and colonialism, etc. This is all the leftist narrative. I'm not saying colonialism was never a problem, but at the back of all of this, you meet you meet people like Noam Chomsky, right? Who's 96. So it's like it's not just the young people. This is the left's take on this is everything negative that befalls America, including 9/11, is just the chickens that have come home to roost, right? We got what we deserved here because we've mistreated everybody.
All right. Well, let's continue that conversation. Sure. Noam Chomsky is interesting. Noam Chomsky came up in a conversation that I had on a sort of really left-leaning. I don't know if it's a podcast or a digital show or whatever. So, what is your biggest concern? Is AI your big concern moving forward as we close out here? Because you have real reservations about it.
I mean, it's a big concern. I mean, I think there are two concerns. There's just the misuse of it in the near term, and in the far term, and we don't know how far. There's the prospect of building truly general intelligence, what's generally referred to as AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is just fundamentally more powerful than us, and if we build it in a way that is not perfectly aligned with our interests, we could find ourselves in a position of having to negotiate terms of our survival with something fundamentally more powerful than we are or could ever be, right? It's like it would be, just imagine trying to play chess for the survival of civilization against the best chess engine which is going to win a trillion times out of a trillion, right? I mean,
so we're trying to negotiate with something that's non-negotiable, that won't negotiate. It's like our policy is not to negotiate with terrorists, and AI's policy is not to negotiate with humans.
I mean, that's going to sound like a science fiction concern, but if you extrapolate from current trends of progress, where we believe we've discovered that intelligence itself is substrate independent, right? There's nothing magical about having a computer made of meat, right? You can do this in silico, right? So we're doing this. We're building intelligent machines. There's no question of that. They're just not general yet, right? They don't have a capacity that can move across all possible cognitive domains of in the way that we can, or certainly all human cognitive domains, I should say. But once we have that, and again, there's no real reason to say we won't eventually have that if we just keep making progress, then we'll be in relationship to something that is more powerful than we are. And the question there is, will we have built it in such a way that it will always care to better and better approximate what we want, right? And it seems by no means guaranteed that we'll be able to do that, because the economic incentives are such that we're really in an arms race now. I mean, all independent companies that are doing this are in an arms race against all others, and America is obviously in an arms race against China and any other competitor, and we're just not incentivized to do this as carefully as we might and perhaps must in order to do it safely.
Sam Harris, this is supposed to be like a 20-minute, maybe 30-minute conversation that went on. I loved it, though. Look, can we do this again? Yeah. Maybe we should take this show on the road or something,
Pleasure to talk to you, Don.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. You take care of yourself, and I'll see you real soon, okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks for watching The Don Lemon Show. Make sure you click on the image in the top right to subscribe to my channel and the thumbnail in the bottom right to watch more content from my show. And I'll see you next time.